welcome David Knott, plasma researcher at AmiseGo, to talk about stepping outside the square.
What's up? I'm David. It's a pleasure being here. Hopefully the clicker will work better for me than it had for future people. But if not, that's okay. I'll freestyle. So, yeah, stepping outside the square. And so, here's what that means. So, we start with the square, which is essentially kind of our intention when we design something. The place that we're coming from, our initial objectives, where we're trying to get to. And then, okay, we've built something, we're launching the square, we're putting it out into the world, and then the square kind of takes on a life of its own. It grows fairly naturally. And so, yeah, I'm going to cover what that means to me today. So, first we have Ethereum, and no one could have predicted that it would become what it is today. No one essentially knew how this idea would essentially bloom and blossom and lead to a myriad of other essentially general purpose world computers that are also trying to fulfill this role, which is essentially providing a place where people can have access to the truth, where people can add their own truth, and where their own truth will never be lost. And so it's out there, it's here now. Yeah, it's super cool. It has opcodes essentially in its general purpose, which is fairly incredible because unlike with previous blockchains that were relatively limited in functionality, as you all know, you can do almost anything with Ethereum, which is amazing. And you can in fact do quite a few things that no one had ever thought you could do when it was first released. So yeah, I'm going to talk about a few things that were surprising and super exciting to me when I found out that they could happen on Ethereum. So first we have Ethereum in the box. This is kind of back in the day. And then, boom, Ethereum launches, and now it's in the wild. And all of a sudden, you have a bunch of people playing around with it. You have a bunch of people actually using the opcodes. And that's kind of when you realize, ooh, not all of these opcodes function how they need to function at scale, essentially. You have kind of discrepancies. Some of the easiest ones to point out are some initial discrepancies in opcode pricing, where opcode gas costs are essentially supposed to represent the amount of computation, the strain on the system that each piece of computation, each state transition is essentially kind of weighing down the system with. And unfortunately, initially, it actually was misaligned in some areas, which created some interesting abuse vectors, but also led to some fairly cool hacks. So yeah, I'm going to talk about those. Generally, how these cool hacks came about is you have Ethereum and you have, or just software in general, and you have the way it was meant to function, the way it's supposed to be. But as I said before, once you put something out into the wild, who knows what could happen? People just start to kind of take what's there and they start to permissionlessly innovate. So essentially they take what's there and they strip it down and they turn it into something new, which is amazing. And because the majority of projects are in this space are open source, it makes it super easy for anyone to do this. You just hit fork and boom, you have a new blockchain. You can add whatever functionality you would like to see. So yeah, if you add this functionality and then, oh wait, Bob tries to use it, your friend, most of the time it doesn't work. But sometimes it does. And then the square grows a little. Who knew Ethereum could do this new thing over here? I didn't. And so, yeah, we're essentially taking something that was designed initially to be a world computer, a source of truth, and now we're expanding upon it to meet the modern needs of dApps, essentially, and other core infrastructure and protocols that are trying to connect with it. So, first super cool thing that that when I read about, I was shocked because I had never thought about essentially using gas this way. So in Ethereum, we essentially pay for transactions with gas. And so there's a gas cost, which is the price you pay for using an opcode, and there is the gas price, which is essentially a variable, and you choose how high a gas price to set. And that essentially affects how quickly your transaction will get included, or if it will get included at all. And so usually you're trying to pay as low a gas price as possible because you want your transaction to get included, but you're also trying to save money. And so when I heard about someone intentionally burning gas, I was surprised. And yeah, here's how it works. So essentially, same old, same old. You have a block, you have a miner. Miner is filling the block up with transactions, and boom, block is full. Business as usual. But now all of a sudden you have this special transaction. This transaction is super important. It's time sensitive. And so it really matters when this transaction is included in the blockchain. An example of this would be essentially any game where you have timestamps or are relying on block numbers to give a reward or to base a certain decision off of. So now all of a sudden, it actually matters. Hey, is this transaction included first in the block? Is it included in this block or the next one? And so to kind of gain more control over this, you can play around with gas prices. And so all of a sudden, boom, we just raised our gas price. Now the miner is including the transaction first in the block. And this is fairly common. It essentially allows not only block proposers to run, but because the majority of miners are running software that select transactions based on how much money they'll make from them, so based off gas price, it allows anyone watching the mempool to essentially sneak their transaction in first. But there's more. What if not only do you want your transaction to be first in the block, what if you want it to be one of the only ones triggering certain functionality? Like, I don't know, say buying a key. All of a sudden, you can essentially start to fill up blocks. And this is where burning gas comes into play. And so, boom, one person can essentially not only create a transaction with a super high gas price to make sure that it's included, but they can also submit other transactions that essentially eat up the block's gas limit. And these burning transactions don't really have kind of special functionality. Their primary purpose is to keep other people out. And this is super cool, and you can, it's essentially something to design for. Because when you're creating a game, all of a sudden, you not only have to think about people abusing your game or whatever you're doing on the blockchain through front running, you also have to think about them essentially blocking other people who you would want to have participating out, especially in time-sensitive situations. Even cooler, gas refunds. I was shocked when I heard about this. I was like, what? You can essentially pay for gas ahead of time. And so, yeah, here's how it works. Block, transactions, miner. Same old, same old. But all of a sudden, all these people just found out about Ethereum, and they're making a bunch of transactions, and they're essentially causing network congestion, and so they're raising the gas price that everyone has to pay in order to get their transactions included within a timely manner. And this is fine for the casual user, but we have Winnie the Pooh here, and Winnie the Pooh buys honey on a daily basis, and so this is not okay with him. He cannot handle that volatility. And so he cannot handle that volatility. And so what Winnie the Pooh ends up doing is he buys gas ahead of time. So he essentially prepays for gas, and then he has it available to use when he needs to buy honey in the future. How does this work in practice? Well, so essentially we have two opcodes, or really one opcode. It's called S-store. And so this is an opcode that there's essentially a lot of discussion around, because when you use S-store, you're storing information into the Ethereum blockchain forever. So you're paying a finite cost, but as of now, the information you're storing will be in the Ethereum blockchain forever. And the cost of and that would mean essentially an infinite cost of storage if it's in the Ethereum blockchain forever. And so a one-time fee for this gets a little tricky, and people can actually be buying gas can essentially weigh down the Ethereum blockchain. But for Winnie the Pooh, it's pretty awesome. So what Winnie the Pooh does is he essentially takes up a bunch of storage. So he makes everyone running an Ethereum full node essentially hold his random storage. It doesn't really matter what he's storing. All that matters is that when the network is not congested, when gas prices are cheap, he is buying as much space as possible to be used at a future date. And so then, all of a sudden, things become congested, and now Winnie the Pooh is set, because when he sends in his computation, to Ethereum, he also clears out the stuff he randomly stored earlier. And because Ethereum is currently set up to actually give a refund when you clear out storage, Winnie the Pooh gets much cheaper computation, because essentially what you do is you subtract the refund from the gas cost of his computation, which allows him to only pay high gas prices with the overhead. So yeah, that's super cool. Even cooler, you can actually commoditize this. And so we have Phil Diane's gas token, which is insanely cool. So essentially, if Winnie the Pooh didn't plan well, he could still take advantage of this by buying gas tokens on the open market. And what that is essentially, instead of Pooh just storing, taking up storage for his own personal use at a later date, it's actually where anyone can create gas tokens which take up Ethereum storage and then sell them or use the gas token themselves at a later date to increase the amount of computation they can perform and decrease the cost. Cool. Cross-chain atomic swaps. This is kind of back to basics, but when I found out you could do Bitcoin, Ethereum atomic swaps, I was just mind blown. And so, yeah, I'm gonna quick walk you guys through it. So yeah, I don't think I need to tell you guys why this is amazing, but yeah, essentially interoperability between blockchains is super cool, and the simplest thing to do is transfer of value. And so we have Bitcoin, which is a UTXO payments blockchain, and we have Ethereum, which is a general purpose blockchain running the EVM. And so Alice wants to trade her Bitcoin for Ether, Bob wants to trade his Ether for Bitcoin, and so here, Alice just sent Bob her Bitcoin. Yeah, this is the simplest way to do it. It's not an atomic swap. And now Bob has both. And this is essentially bad because it's not trustless. And the entire, essentially entirely, what we're trying to do is create a source of truth and let people rely on that truth to arbitrate, as opposed to directly using trust. And so this is not the optimal way to do this, because now Alice has no guarantee that Bob will essentially deliver on his word and send Ether over to her. So here's what we can do. Alice creates a secret. It doesn't really matter what that secret what it is. Hopefully, it's not like password because that's crap. Yeah, because that's guessable. So it should be actually somewhat random, or at least thought out. Don't be careless. And then Alice essentially hashes the secret, and then she creates a transaction where essentially, if Bob presents the secret essentially creates a transaction trying to spend this Bitcoin with from his address with the secret, he's allowed to unlock it, and then she also allows herself to unlock it after a given period of time. So this essentially protects Alice in this situation that Bob doesn't offer his side of, or Bob doesn't honor his side of the deal, because now after 24 hours, Alice is essentially able to back out and get her money back. And now what we're able to do on the other side is basically the same thing. So Bob locks up his Ether to the same hash that Alice has. So, and he also gives himself an out in case Alice does not follow through. But his out needs to be shorter than Alice's. This is very, very important. If that was 25 hours, Alice could essentially take his money and run, because she would wait until her time lock expired, and then she would trigger his time lock with her secret, and boom, now Alice has both, which is, not intended. We're trying to have an atomic swap here. Anyway, Alice Alice can share her X, or more likely, she just claims the Ether from Bob. Now Bob has access to X. He can claim the Bitcoin, and boom, they're both super stoked because they've traded trustlessly. Bam. Now I'm going to talk about expanding the square. So a lot of the stuff, or the things I mentioned before, are somewhat primitives. And what I work on a daily basis is Plasma. So Plasma is a layer 2 scaling solution, and it actually has quite a few similarities with Bitcoin, at least as of now, because essentially what we're doing with Plasma is we're scaling through compaction. So with the current Plasma design, it's a UTXO-based payment blockchain, much like Bitcoin. And so what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of state, in our case UTXOs, and we're essentially squishing it together through multiple rounds of hash functions, creating a Merkle tree, and then we're storing that Merkle tree on Ethereum. And so yeah, it's super cool. And eventually, I would say one thing to look forward to is that the atomic swaps I mentioned between Bitcoin and Ethereum could also happen between Plasma chains and Ethereum, because atomic swaps with payment chains are, essentially they're super doable with scripting functionality, as opposed to needing EVM functionality, which is what a lot of the more advanced atomic swap procedures require. And finally, we are storing state. And so before I said we're essentially storing Merkle roots onto Ethereum for Plasma. What we can actually do when we're storing these roots is we can take advantage of the gas refund I mentioned earlier. So as opposed to storing each Plasma chain block root individually, we can actually combine them together so that each one is provable, each one is accessible, but we can significantly reduce essentially the cost by combining them together on Ethereum and creating essentially multiple Merkle trees out of the block roots. So yeah, this is how Plasma works, and I'm almost out of time, but my name is David. Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.